In this video, I'll be going over every single leader and troop in Warcraft Rumble to see which ones are the best and which ones are the worst at PvP. I'm Funky Monki, and I was one of the first players invited to early beta access, and one of the top ranked PvP players all throughout beta, and I'm here to share all my knowledge with you so you can make the best team possible. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now let's start off with the leaders, and I'm going to be going in no particular order. So first up, we have Baron Rivendare, and he is going to be an easy S tier, probably the single best leader, especially starting out, but even at the higher ranks is still amazing. Just spawning some free skeletons everywhere across the map allows you so much map control for free. Not to mention, almost all of his talents are really good too. Up next, we have Blood Mage Thalnos, and I'm gonna put him sadly into D tier. He does require a lot of build around. You need quite a few spells in order to make use of him, and even then, you need to make your team able to protect him as well. Because he has kind of a squishy backline unit, if your opponent plays a Worgen or a spell to kill him, he does die pretty easily, so it's hard to snowball him as much as we can. Next up, we have Cairn Bloodhoof, and for now, I'm gonna put him in C tier. He is a very expensive frontline unit, and expensive units always come with a very high trade-off cost, especially if they're on the ground, because your opponent can play like Harpies or a Griffin Rider to counter it for free, but a good Cairn push can be somewhat difficult to deal with if you don't have the right answers for it. Next up, we have Rend, and I'm gonna put him for now in A. He is just a great unit by himself that just comes with a big package. You get a melee fighter, you get a dragon, makes all of your flyers cheaper, and pretty much all of his talents are really good as well. The only reason he's not an S tier is because he is very expensive, but just the sheer amount of value he provides for himself and for your whole team definitely deserves an A spot. Our next leader is going to be Jaina, and I'm going to put her in B. She definitely does require some build around because she's kind of useless if you don't have any spells in your deck, but at the higher levels of play, she's actually pretty good. She has very high skill cap though. Because she has a bonus to increase your spells, you can actually reach some key breakpoints so your spells can kill units that otherwise wouldn't. For example, normally Chain Lightning does not kill a Griffin Rider, but if you have Jaina on the field, it does. But at the end of the day, she is only a 3-cost weak ranged unit, so if you don't take advantage of her ability right away, your opponent might be able to kill her before you can use her. All right, next up we have Charlga, and I'm sorry, but she's gonna go in dead last. Sorry, Charlga. First off, her only being able to hit ground units is definitely a disadvantage, and her main passive ability is kind of weird too. And in theory, you can create some really big pushes for very little gold with her ability, but in reality, you just need the versatility of being able to play whatever mini you want whenever you need it. All right, so next up we got Sneed, and I'm gonna throw him in C tier. I think Sneed is mainly used for his passive ability for that extra gold income, but if you can build your team in the right way to constantly get those gold veins and those chests, you can push a huge gold advantage with Sneed. But if your opponent is really good at contesting those gold veins and chests, then he starts to become pretty hard to utilize. Our next leader up is going to be Murkai, and I'm going to place Murkai in probably A tier. Being able to have Murlocs go everywhere around the map is so good for map control, kind of like Baron, where you just get those free units everywhere to contest those gold nodes and those chests, but he is pretty weak by himself and does cost 4 gold. All right, next up is going to be my personal favorite, and that's going to be Hogger. I'm throwing him straight up into S tier. Hogger's been my boy ever since I joined the game, so I may have a little bias there, but he's actually really good though. He doesn't have the best talents, but he does have one of the best passive abilities in my opinion, because if you play him just a few times, he becomes a menace that is super hard to deal with. It doesn't take too much build around for a team with Hogger either. You just throw a bunch of cheap things in your deck to cycle to your Hogger as many times as possible, and he can pretty much just carry the game for you. Our next leader and our newest leader is going to be Sylvanas, which was just released not too long ago, and I'm gonna put her all the way in D tier. Yep, that's right. She's very expensive on her own, costing 6 gold, and she's a ranged unit, which means you have to spend even more gold to put a tank in front of her. And oftentimes, when she dies, the Banshee will just target something random, or like a little Defias bandit, and you don't really get too much value off of that Banshee. Our next leader is going to be Grom, and I'm going to put him around B tier. Grom is just a solid unit. He doesn't really do anything too flashy or special, but he's a really good frontline unit that makes your backline units even better. Doesn't require too much synergy or build around, and all of his talents are pretty decent as well. All right, getting towards the end of our leaders here, we have Tyrion next. And Tyrion, I'm gonna place all the way up in A. He's one of the best frontline units, and if you can get a big push with a Tyrion in there, it's almost impossible to deal with. And it's just easy to put him in front of basically any ranged unit, and it just makes it really annoying to deal with. And he's not that expensive either, only costing 4 gold. Our next leader up is gonna be Maiev, and she's going to go straight up into S tier. Because you're playing a lot of Unbounds means that you get a lot of map control, and it's really easy to discount her down to like 3, 2, or 1 gold. And a 1 cost Maiev just packs so much value. Not to mention that all of her talents are pretty good as well. All right, so for our last leader is gonna be Dracasath, and I'm gonna put him in C tier. Kind of like Sneed and Cairn, he is a 5 gold tank that can be dealt with pretty easily by flyers, so you need to support him with a big push. But if you can line up enough gold to put Dracasath down along with maybe a couple range units behind him, he just steamrolls all the way to the base. So this is gonna be my completed tier list for the leaders for PvP. Now let's see how all the troops fare. All right, so I know there's a lot of troops to go over, but let's hop into it. First up, we have the Abomination. One of the best tanks in the game, in my opinion. A as far as tanks go, but just solid unit overall. Put him in B tier. He is very expensive, but as far as tanks go, he just packs so much punch. And then next up, we have the Angry Chickens, and I'm gonna put them in F tier. It seems like they're just too easily dealt with. Arcane Blast, I'm gonna put in D tier for now. It does have some uses, especially with Jaina, and also the 1 gold first tap version of this is really good to break stealth minions, but there are still a lot of things that it doesn't kill. The next troop up is gonna be Banshee, and I'm gonna put her in C for now. I might move her down to D. Sometimes it can be awkward to find the right opportunity to use the Banshee, and even then, if your opponent has a Blizzard with the Cold Snap talent to freeze, it does actually stop the Banshee. But if you can line her up, it provides a ton of value. Next up, we have the Bat Rider. I'm going to throw in D tier. Being able to only hit ground is a very big disadvantage, and there is a lot of flyers in PvP. Next up is Blizzard, and I'm going to put all the way into S tier. For 4 gold, it kills almost every mini in the game that cost 4 gold or less, so you automatically get an even trade. And if your opponent has multiple minis grouped together, it's just insane value. Especially combined with the Cold Snap talent, it basically turns it into a stun for the entire duration, which is just insane. Our next spell is going to be Chain Lightning, and that's going to go just underneath Blizzard, not quite an S, but an A tier. It does value trade into a lot of great things. It can kill the Kobold Miner really quickly, it can kill Harpies, it's really good at breaking stealth minions, and it can also kill Whelp Eggs, but by being only 2 gold is just a very versatile spell. And then our next troop is also another spell, going to be Cheat Death, and that's going to go in F tier just because it's too situational. All right, so Core Hounds is next, and I'm going to put them at a solid F tier as well. They're just way too expensive and easily dealt with, and them stopping to resurrect each other gets kind of awkward when your ranged units move ahead of them. Next up, we got the Dark Iron Miner, and I'm going to throw him into B tier. Don't get me wrong, going after gold is always good, but for 2 gold or 1, you can probably just put any other cycle unit, so that way you can cycle to your Kobold Miner faster anyways. Then we got the Darkspear Troll, which I'll put into B tier as well. It's an amazing starter unit and a fantastic backline, especially for only 3 gold, but it can die to a lot of things like Whelp Eggs or Safe Pilot. This next one is going to be one that you've probably never seen before, and this is Deep Breath. You get it after you beat Onyxia, and yes, it is S tier, and it should be after beating Onyxia. But the damage is comparable to Blizzard, but it just has a wider area of effect that basically takes out an entire lane. These next guys are some of my favorite. I have them in almost every single one of my teams, and that's the Defias Bandits. At only 1 gold, this thing always gets value, whether it takes out a Kobold Miner, or you can even take out some 2 and 3 gold units, especially if you have the Poison talent. You can even take out some 4 gold units. Or if you have the Picklock talent, it more than makes up for its own gold. And yeah, being only 1 gold, you just can't beat these guys. This next one is going to be the Drake, and I'm going to throw this one into, I would say probably C in general, but it could be bumped up to the B with the Mother Drake talent. That is by far the best talent in PvP because the little whelps that the Drake spawns as it moves just provide a lot of map control. But without that talent, I would probably say it's a solid C, because it does die pretty easily for 4 gold. Next, we have Earth Elemental, and that's gonna go into B tier. Great for taking towers, great for distracting backline units, and only 3 gold is great, but only being a siege damage unit means you have to support this Earth Elemental with other stuff to make him useful. And then our next troop is gonna be Execute Spell, and this one I'll throw maybe between D and C tier. I think for now we'll do D. It's great at taking out big tanks like the Abomination or a tower, and also great with Jaina, but it does have some more kind of niche scenarios. And then our next troop is going to be the Fire Elemental, and that's going to go into D tier. It's not bad, but I think there's just better minis that do what this does. And then we have the Fire Hammer, which is going to go into D tier. A long-range backline mini is never bad behind a tank, but at being 4 gold is quite the investment if your opponent can easily kill it with like a Worgen or a Safe Pilot. And our next mini is going to be the Flame Waker. This guy I think is going to go into maybe F tier. Being a bombard unit is a serious disadvantage, especially when so many of the minis in PvP are flyers. Same reason why the Bat Rider is down so low as well. Next up, we got the Footmen, which I'll put in maybe C tier. They're definitely not bad on their own. They're very, very tanky, but if you can combine them with a healer like Tyrion or the Shaman, I'd probably bump these up to maybe even A tier, but by themselves, I think they deserve a solid C. Then we have the Gargoyle, the flying tank. This guy hits like a truck when it connects to a tower. So I'm going to put this into B, because unless it gets to a tower, it doesn't do anything. But if you can protect it with some spells or unbound units, it takes towers very quickly. And then we have the Ghoul. I'm going to put in maybe F tier. It's a pretty decent tank. It doesn't do a whole lot of damage though. And the thing about the Ghoul when it cannibalizes is whatever ranged unit you have behind it will probably walk past it while it's eating. Next, we have the Null Brute, which I'm going to throw into D. It's a great starter unit, but as you progress, you'll just find better tanks that do better things. And then we have the Goblin Sappers. Oh, these little guys are annoying. I think I'm going to put them into C tier for now, especially with the Rocket Booster talent where they become super fast, and maybe you smoke bomb them to give them stealth. All you need is 2 of these guys to connect to a tower for you to take it. But without smoke bomb to give them stealth or make them go faster, or without the talent to make them go faster, they're definitely a lot easier to deal with. Then we have Griffin Rider for our next troop, and this one's gonna go all the way up at the top. Griffin Rider is another one that I put into most of my teams, because that being only 2 gold and a flyer unit means it can kill a lot of ground units that can't attack it back. And at being only 2 gold and a flyer, your opponent usually has to invest at least 2 or 3 gold, if not more, to kill this. And then we have another flyer, the Harpies. I'm gonna put Harpies into A tier, and if you're able to put like an unbound behind the Harpies to distract the opponent's minis, the Harpies can just rip towers and rip minis. They just do so much damage. Then we have the Harvest Golem, which I'm gonna throw into D. Kind of like the other tanks down here, there's just better tanks in the game if you want to use a frontline unit. Then our next troop is gonna be Holy Nova. I'm gonna throw into maybe C tier. Pretty much all the talents for it are pretty good, and in the right team can definitely turn the tides of battle, but it is somewhat situational as well. Then we have a lot of people's favorite mini, the Huntress. I'm gonna throw Huntress into A tier because she is very expensive, but she does a really good job at what she does. And her having the resistant trait also makes her pretty tough to deal with. And yeah, the 5 gold on a ranged unit means that it's kind of expensive, so it's tough to put a frontline tank in front of her. And then we have the Kobold Miner, definitely S tier, because I mean, who doesn't love gold, right? Then we have Living Bomb, which is definitely F tier, very expensive spell. And if your opponent doesn't play any big groups of troops together, you just never get any value out of this. And then we have Meat Wagon, which is also another F tier unit in PvP, simply because it's a bombard unit. So kind of like what we're talking about, there's a lot of flyers out there. And then we have Molten Giant, which is another F tier mini. Doesn't really do much other than just sit there and soak up hits. But for the same cost, you could play an Abomination, which hooks a ranged mini, has more health, does more damage. And then we have Mountaineer, which I guess is yet another F tier mini. And if you'll notice a trend here, high cost units come with a big trade-off. And for the Mountaineer, if you can easily kill the Mountaineer, the bear pretty much just does nothing. And then we have Murgle, the Murlocs, which I will put at 8 because they're only 2 gold and they do trade up to a lot of other things. Because they're a squad, you can split push them as well too. And it's just a very inexpensive ranged unit that you can back up a frontline unit with. And all the talents for Murlocs are really good as well. Our next mini is going to be Necromancer, and I'm going to throw this one into... I'm going to say C tier. It's very close to B, but there's a couple things holding it back. For one, it does die to a couple unbound units like a Worgen or Safe Pilot or Whelps. And when its skeletons die, it takes quite a bit of time for it to resummon the skeletons again before it starts attacking. So there are some windows of opportunity where it's just doing nothing and your opponent can kill it. Boy, you know, I didn't even expect to get this many F tier units. So let's shrink my camera a little bit. Let's make some room. All right, so the next mini up is going to be Ogre. And these guys aren't bad, but they're very expensive. I'm going to put them into maybe C tier. They are a great ranged unit and they have a lot of health, so they can survive quite a few things, but they are very expensive at 5 gold. So it does kind of make it tougher to put down a decent tank in front of them. And then next up, we have the Plague Farmer, and kind of like every other Bombard unit, I'm going to throw it into F tier. And then we have this hilarious Polymorph spell, which I'll throw into D. Being able to strip the resistances off of enemy minis, as well as making them vulnerable, is actually huge, especially against big pushes, but you need to back it up with your own push. Simply polymorphing enemy minis does nothing if you don't have your own minis there to kill them. So it is somewhat situational, and it definitely loses a lot of value if you're only using it on like 1 or 2 enemy minis. And then we have the Prowler. I'm actually going to throw Prowler into B tier. It's a very fast unit, so you can grab chests really quickly. You can kill an enemy gold miner very quickly. It has a lot of attack and a lot of health, especially all just for 3 gold. Not to mention the fact that there's not too many fast frontline units that you can maybe put in front of a Huntress or in front of the Murlocs. And then next up, we have the Pyromancer. I'm going to throw the Pyromancer into maybe B, even C tier. She is a very weak backline unit that dies to a lot of things. And then we have another S tier unit here, the Quillbore. This thing, being an unbound mini at only 2 gold, is so versatile. You can throw this guy anywhere. You can grab a chest, you can distract an enemy backline unit, and especially because this has the resistance trait, a lot of backline units have elemental damage, so this is great to distract those backline units. And then our next troop is going to be the Raptors. I'm going to throw these guys into D. They're not very strong, but they are somewhat versatile. They're a fast frontline unit, which is kind of a rarity, and the versatility of being able to play 1 or 2 or 3 of them is great. But again, they are very weak, so they do die to a lot of things. And then we have the poster child of Warcraft Rumble, the Safe Pilot, and she is of course S tier. I mean, they just can't have their poster child being a bad mini, right? But yeah, either with the coming in hot talent or the stealth talent, she can take out almost every single ranged mini that cost 5 or less. And the fact that she's unbound means that you get to grab chests. She does a lot of damage on both her entrance and her attack. Yeah, she's just amazing. And then we have the Frostwolf Shaman. I'll probably put into C tier. Very good healing, pretty good health. The only thing that it lacks is damage, so you might need to support the Frostwolf Shaman with another damage dealer next to it, but it is a fantastic support unit behind any tank. And then we have Skeleton Party. I'll probably put them into D. Any unbound unit is decent, but at being 4 gold does cost quite a lot, especially if your opponent has any AoE. And I mean, let's be real, there's a lot of AoE in the game. And then just like their skeleton buddies, we're gonna put the skeletons with the other skeletons here in D tier, pretty much for the same reasons. Now we have another spell here, which is Smoke Bomb. I'm gonna throw Smoke Bomb into D because it has very specific niche instances where it's good. It's pretty much only good with the talents to make some of your minis faster to get to a tower, like the Goblin Sappers or a Gargoyle, but I think it has just too many niche instances. And then we have the little spiders. These guys I'm gonna throw into F. And actually, we're having so many F tier units here that I have to make another row. But yeah, there's just too much AoE, and they don't do a whole lot of damage. And then we have the Stonehoof Tauren, which is not a bad frontline unit. I'm going to put into C, maybe even B, because it is only 4 gold, and it has a lot of health for just 4 gold. And the dashing means that it can take out those ranged units as well. The only problem though is sometimes it dashes too far or it gets too far ahead of the ranged units that were behind it. And then we have the Vultures. A lot of people would probably put them into F, but I'm gonna throw them into D. By being a 1 gold flyer, these can actually kill a lot of ground units that can't target air. And it's a really cheap mini to kill an enemy kobold miner, but they don't do a whole lot of damage. So unless you use them just right, the enemy mini can probably just walk right underneath them and pass past them. And then winding down towards the end here, we have the Warsong Grunts next, and I'm gonna throw these guys into F, maybe D, but probably F. And it's mostly because of their talents. All 3 of their talents are just absolutely useless. And by being a squad tank, there's a lot of AoE in the meta, so they just kind of die twice as fast. And then going into another horde unit, the Warsong Raider next, I would put this one into D. It doesn't have bad damage or bad health, but at being 4 gold, I would probably say is maybe just a little overcosted. And by being a fast frontline unit, there's a very limited amount of ranged units that you can put behind it to support it as well. And then getting into our last couple of minis here, we have Whelp Eggs, which I will put at S tier, because with the talent that damages enemies when they hatch, it can take out any backline mini, or you could even put them in front of a ground mini that attacks them so they can take it out. And they're just so versatile and so annoying to deal with. And then our last mini here, but certainly not least, is going to be the Worgen. And I'm going to throw him all the way up into A tier. Great at taking out any backline ranged unit, grabbing chests, and it is probably the best mini to counter the Huntress because she has that resistance trait. So this doing physical damage is the perfect counter. So that about wraps up all the troops from the best to the worst here. Looking over it here, I'm pretty happy with the results with how the tier list ended up here. If anything, I might want to move the Dark Iron Miner down a tier and maybe the Pyromancer up a tier, just because there's so many good cycle minis in S tier that we might be able to just cycle fast enough we don't need the Miner, and then Pyromancer seems pretty versatile to fit into B. And just so we can confuse the people that are skipping ahead to the end of the video, let's make them as confused as possible here and switch some of these around here. That's gonna wrap up the best and worst troops and leaders to use in PvP. I hope this was helpful. Once again, I'm Funky Monkey, and I dedicated this channel to creating the best PvP content and high-level gameplay. So if you love PvP in Warcraft Rumble or want to get better, then consider subscribing. But I'll see you in the next video. Stay funky.